reading tonight is found again in the book of James. We're in the first chapter. We're looking at verses 19 to 27 tonight. Hearing and doing the word. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves, and on going away, immediately forget what they were like. For those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers, but who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious, and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. We're continuing to work our way through James's book, or letter. Excuse me. And here we have this talk about hearing and doing the word. And the title is, What? You Actually Want Me to Do Something? It's kind of startling, isn't it, Captain? It's like, what? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But at first it starts off with, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. That's a real tough one for us, isn't it? And I confess that's difficult for me. You tend to want to reply right away, and you don't want to stop and think and plot out a response. And we've kind of gotten used to doing that, haven't we? We want to quickly answer. We don't listen to hear, as this saying goes. We listen to respond. And we need to try to focus on listening to hear and keeping our anger and our response under control, because it's saying here that anger does not produce God's righteousness. Now, there is such a thing as righteous anger, but you have to be careful, because most of the time we just get angry because of our ego, right? Our ego's been bruised. So that's generally why we get upset, not necessarily about, oh my gosh. Though there are certain things that I can think of where I get upset because I feel that someone has been stepped upon or been intruded upon. That would more be in line with righteous anger. But most of the time when we get angry is because our ego has been bruised and we lash out. Now we jump into verse 21, and we come into some really interesting things in verse 21. And verse 21 in English loses an awful lot of its colorfulness. In Greek, it's really colorful language, and it's very vivid language. It says, therefore rid yourselves. And that word rid means in the Greek to take off dirty clothing. It's not, we don't think of it that way. It's an act of shedding, stripping away that's filthy and dirty, and getting that away from us. Realistically, there is an implication of repentance there, turning away from that is filthy. And so, rid yourself doesn't have the same impact as this word that means to take off dirty clothing, does it? It just doesn't have quite the same oomph. And it goes on from that, and it says, rid yourself of all sordidness, and rank growth of wickedness. That sordidness word there can mean one of two things. It can mean vulgarity, meaning vulgar language or vulgar behavior. But interestingly enough, it can also mean a wax built up in your ears. And it would step towards that inability to hear, doesn't it? That inability to change, perhaps. We don't want to. I'm resistant. I've got a blockage there. So if I don't hear you, I don't have to change, do I, bud? No. I don't have to listen to what you're saying. So I don't want to take that wax out of my ears, because then I might actually hear you, and I might realize I'm wearing dirty laundry. And so you can see that the vividness of this is so diminished by converting it to our English language. And the rank growth of wickedness, we surround ourselves with all of the evil of the world, and welcome with meekness the implanted word. Now the word meekness is interesting there because I heard a minister talking about, well, it's like a good horse is called meek, and I'm kind of like, my whole life of growing up around horses, I've never heard someone saying that a well-behaved horse was meek. And I've never ever thought that the word meek was a good quality for a horse, because that would, in many ways, would imply, not necessarily, but it could imply timid, and you don't want a timid horse. Meekness means more that you don't have your pride up in it, right? We're back to that quick to anger thing. Why am I angry? Because of my ego. Why am I not welcoming the word? Because I'm building myself up, and I'm not being meek. I'm not being humble and diminishing myself. And so the meekness is more of a presence of mind, willingness to accept, I guess. The implanted word that is the power to save your souls. But now we're going to get into really what we want to look at, and that is that, you want me to do something? And of course the thing there, but be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. And that whole sentence is really a Greek word. And it means people who listen to philosophers but don't join the group. So it's someone that listens and sits in the back of the church every Sunday, but never really dives in, never really takes a hold of the good news, so to say. That wouldn't necessarily mean that you start doing church activities. That's not the point. It's you don't really accept Christ. But you sit there and listen. That's a very moving sermon. That doesn't mean anything to me. I don't want to change my clothes. I don't want to take off the dirty outer layer that I have. I don't want to give that up. I don't want to take the wax on my ears either, do I? But I want to be able to, I'll sit back there and I'll be back there, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to change. And so it's interesting, again, there you've got a word, again, that is much more vivid to us in Greek than it is to us in English. For if any hearers of the word are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. And sometimes that's translated as look at themselves in a glass, and that's a bad translation because mirrors in the ancient world were usually like bronze or brass or something that was polished so much that you could get a bit of a reflection in it. They didn't have glass per se, glass mirrors anyway per se in that day and age. So it would be a very imperfect thing. That's when Paul talks about seeing yourself in a mirror. You see yourselves imperfectly because it's not a perfect reflection like what we are used to looking at in a modern mirror. So we have to remember that. And the reflection that they would be looking at would be at best a very poor representation of what it's reflecting. So, thus, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you see that image and you walk away and you don't really know what you saw. But here it's talking about they listen and they walk away and they don't really having seen that thing in the mirror, they don't let it impact them. It doesn't make any difference in there. They forget what they saw. They forget what they heard, and they don't change. And that's the whole thing. Again, we come back to, if you accept the word, there has to be some level of change. You have to be that first, like a first fruit. Remember, we ended at verse 18, and to be like a first fruit. And you have to be that perfect sacrifice. We know we're imperfect, as we talked about last time, but through Christ we are made perfect. But the idea is that we have to make some change. We have to try to move towards that. We have to let go of that dirty laundry. We have to rid ourselves of that sin and try to turn back to God. And so none should be able to have a true and genuine encounter with Christ and walk away still wearing their dirty clothes and forgetting that beautiful image that you should have seen, the reflection of Christ in your life. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for the words of James, the just, the brother of Christ. Lord, please let us take to heart what James is writing to us to let go of that which is cluttering up our lives, that which is imperfect and what weighs us down, and to truly listen and to truly become doers and not just people that listen and walk away unchanged. Pray this in your love and your grace.